The sharp crack of an open palm against flesh cut through the morning chatter like a rifle shot. 72-year-old Helen Whitmore staggered backward, one hand flying to her cheek where the heat of the impact already bloomed into a deep bruise. Sheriff Rexford Mallory wiped a few drops of spilled coffee from the front of his immaculate tan uniform, his lip curled in pure contempt as he loomed over her. The insult he spat froze every conversation in the diner. In his mind, she was nothing more than a frail old woman in a town he had owned for years. He had no idea that her only son had just returned from a classified deployment, and that son was a Navy SEAL, 20s. Outside, the late summer sun beat down on the cracked asphalt of Main Street in Willowbrook, Georgia, wrapping the small southern town in a thick, humid heat that made the air shimmer above the pavement. Inside Marcy's diner, the scent of frying bacon, strong black coffee, and warm biscuits filled the space. The low murmur of locals swapping stories over plates of eggs and grits drifted from booth to booth. Wednesday mornings were always the same, anchored by the quiet presence of Helen Whitmore. She was 72, a retired high school English teacher who had spent 40 years pouring her heart into the town's young people. A woman of deep faith and quiet dignity, she wore her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her hands, twisted slightly by arthritis, were still quick to offer a comforting touch on a neighbor's shoulder. Half the people in the diner had learned how to write a proper sentence in her classroom. They knew her, they respected her, they loved her. But Willowbrook carried a deep, dark underbelly, and that underbelly wore a badge. The bell above the glass door chimed hard. The easy hum of the diner died at once. Sheriff Rexford Mallory strode in. He was a massive man, 6'4", barrel-chested, face permanently flushed with arrogance. A third-generation sheriff, he treated Willowbrook not as a place to protect, but as a personal kingdom to rule. His reputation for brutality, especially toward the town's black residents, was an open secret the local government was either too terrified or too complicit to confront. 70s. Mallory never waited in lines. He never asked nicely. He walked straight to the counter, expecting the world to part for him. Helen, struggling a little with her stiff knees, had just stood up from her usual booth near the back to fetch a fresh packet of sugar. Her vision wasn't what it used to be, and her right leg dragged just a fraction. As she turned, she didn't see the sheriff barreling down the narrow aisle. Her shoulder clipped his massive arm. The collision was minor, but it was enough. The lukewarm coffee in his heavy ceramic mug sloshed over the rim and spilled a few brown drops onto the crisp fabric of his uniform shirt. For a second, the diner went so quiet, you could hear the grease popping on the grill in the back. 85s. "Oh, Lord," Helen gasped, immediately reaching for a napkin. "Sheriff Mallory, I am so incredibly sorry. Let me help you with that. My eyes just didn't catch you." Mallory looked down at the stain, then up at Helen. His eyes were cold, flat, and empty of any human feeling. He didn't see a retired teacher. He saw a target he could demean to remind the room who held the power. "Get your filthy hands away from me," he snarled, voice low and gravelly enough to carry to every corner. Helen froze, the white paper napkin trembling in her fingers. "Sheriff, it was an accident. Keep your hands off my uniform." He took a step forward so his boots scuffed the linoleum. "Oh, you people think you can just wander around bumping into folks, disrespecting the law. You think because you've been here a long time you forget your place. I'm sick of looking at you. Marlene Marcy Quinn, the diner's owner, stepped out from behind the counter, face pale. Sheriff, please. It's just Helen. She's got bad joints. Let me get you a towel. Your meal's on the house. Shut up, Marcy, Mallory snapped without looking at her. He leaned down until his face was inches from Helen's. You know how much this uniform costs, old woman? You know what it represents? It represents the line between order and the garbage that ruins this country. 75s. Helen's voice shook, but her chin lifted with that old teacher's pride. She had dealt with bullies before. There is no need to speak to me that way. It was a mistake. Now, excuse me. She tried to step around him and return to her booth. That was her mistake. In Mallory's twisted mind, walking away was defiance. A challenge to his absolute authority. Without a second thought, he raised his massive, heavy-ringed hand and struck her. The slap was vicious. The sheer force of the blow lifted Helen off her feet. She crashed hard against the edge of a formica table before crumpling to the checkered floor, knocking over a tray of empty glasses that shattered around her. Gasps and muffled cries erupted from the patrons. Two men at the counter halfway stood, fists clenched, but Mallory instantly dropped his hand to the butt of his service weapon. "Anybody got something to say?" he roared, glaring at the paralyzed room. The men slowly sat back down, eyes dropping to their plates in deep, agonizing shame. Nobody moved. The fear Mallory commanded was total. He looked down at Helen. She was on the floor, holding her cheek. Blood had begun to pool in the corner of her mouth where her teeth had cut the inside of her lip. Her glasses lay broken beside her. "Clean up this mess," Mallory said to Marcy, adjusting his gun belt. 45s. "And tell this old bat that if I see her in town again this week, I'll arrest her for assaulting an officer." With that, the sheriff turned and walked out. The bell chimed a cheerful, mocking sound as the door swung shut. On the floor, Helen did not cry. She slowly gathered her broken glasses, hands shaking violently as the crushing weight of humiliation and helplessness settled over her. She had never felt so entirely alone. She did not go to the hospital. She would not let Marcy call an ambulance, and she certainly would not let anyone call the state police. She knew how Willowbrook worked. Calling the authorities on Sheriff Mallory was like calling a wolf to complain about a bite. 70s. She walked the 6 blocks back to her small, single-story house on Birch Street, locked the deadbolt, and finally let the tears fall. By the time evening rolled around, the entire left side of her face was a swollen canvas of dark purple and angry blue. Her jaw throbbed with a relentless, sick agony, and her ribs ached from where she had hit the table. She sat in her rocking chair by the front window, clutching an ice pack wrapped in a dish towel, staring out at the fading light. She felt broken. The town she had loved, the people she had taught, had watched her get struck down and done nothing. The silence of her neighbors hurt almost as much as the physical blow. What Helen did not know was that a black, unmarked SUV was currently turning off the interstate 28 miles outside of Willowbrook. Behind the wheel sat Senior Chief Petty Officer Ryan Whitmore. Ryan was 34, but his eyes looked much older. He was a man carved from granite and hardened in the most unforgiving corners of the globe as an operator in the United States Navy's Naval Special Warfare Development Group, commonly known as SEAL Team 6. He had spent the last decade hunting high-value targets in the mountains of Afghanistan, the deserts of Syria, and the humid expanses of the Horn of Africa. He was a decorated warrior bearing a silver star for pulling 3 wounded teammates from a burning Black Hawk under heavy fire, and a Purple Heart that left a jagged scar across his left shoulder. He had not told his mother he was coming home. His deployment had ended a month earlier than expected, and he wanted to surprise her. 45s. It had been nearly 2 years since he had sat on her porch and drunk her sweet tea. As he drove the winding country roads, a rare, genuine smile touched his lips. He was looking forward to peace. He was looking forward to the quiet. He pulled the SUV into Helen's gravel driveway just as the sun dipped completely below the horizon, painting the sky in bruises of purple and dark blue. He grabbed his duffel bag from the passenger seat, walked up the wooden steps, and unlocked the front door with his old brass key. "Mom," Ryan called out, stepping into the hallway. The house was dark, smelling faintly of lavender and old paper. "It's me! Surprise!" He heard a sharp intake of breath from the living room. 55s. He walked in and flipped the light switch. Helen was sitting in her chair, the ice pack lowered to her lap. She quickly turned her head away, trying to hide her face in the shadows, but Ryan had spent his entire adult life scanning environments for the smallest anomalies. His eyes locked onto her instantly. The smile vanished from his face. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He dropped his duffel bag. It hit the floor with a heavy, dead thud. He crossed the room in 3 massive, silent strides and knelt in front of her. "David." "Ryan," Helen whispered, voice trembling. "Baby, you're home early." "Mom, look at me." His voice was incredibly calm. It wasn't the frantic panic of a worried son. It was the terrifying, icy composure of a professional who had just recognized a threat. Helen slowly turned her head. When Ryan saw the full extent of the bruising, the swollen eye, the split lip, the dark, finger-shaped marks near her jawline, something shifted behind his eyes. The dutiful, loving son retreated, and the Tier 1 operator stepped forward. "Who did this?" he asked softly. "It was an accident, Ryan. I fell. I tripped at the diner and hit the table." She tried to force a smile, but it made her wince. She knew her son. She knew what he was capable of, and she was terrified of what would happen if he unleashed the war he carried inside him on this small town. Ryan reached out, calloused thumbs gently tracing the air just millimeters above the bruise. "Mom," he said, voice dropping an octave, "I've spent 12 years analyzing blunt force trauma. A fall hits the zygomatic arch and the brow ridge. This is a strike pattern. 4 fingers and a thumb. Somebody slapped you hard enough to cause microfractures in the orbital floor." He paused, eyes locking on to hers. 60s. "I'm going to ask you one more time, and you are going to tell me the truth. Who put their hands on you?" Helen burst into tears. The wall she had built up all day crumbled under the intense, protective weight of her son's gaze. She leaned forward, burying her face in his broad shoulder, and cried out the shame and the fear. Between sobs, she told him everything: the coffee, the racial slurs, Sheriff Rexford Mallory, and how nobody in the diner dared to breathe, let alone intervene. Ryan held her, stroking her silver hair, letting her pour out her pain. He didn't interrupt. He didn't shout. He didn't punch a wall or scream for vengeance. He just listened, cataloging every detail, building a psychological profile of his target. 80s. When she finally pulled back, wiping her eyes with a tissue, she looked at him pleadingly. "Ryan, please, you can't do anything. Mallory runs the police, the judges, the mayor. He's been looking for an excuse to hurt people. If you go after him, he'll lock you up or worse. Just let it go. I'm okay. I'm alive." Ryan stood up slowly. He kissed her gently on the forehead. "You're right, Mom. We'll handle it legally. I'm going to go to the pharmacy to get you some proper painkillers. Lock the door behind me." Helen sighed in relief, believing she had talked him down. "Okay, honey. 25s. I love you." "I love you too," Ryan said. He walked out to his SUV. He didn't start the engine immediately. He sat in the darkness, gripping the steering wheel. His heart rate, which rested at 40 beats per minute, hadn't elevated. His breathing was steady. He closed his eyes and initiated his mental OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, act. A small-town sheriff had assaulted his mother. A corrupt badge was terrorizing civilians. The local system was compromised. Ryan opened his eyes. They were completely devoid of warmth. Sheriff Mallory had just picked a fight with a ghost who brought the hell of the modern battlefield wherever he went. Russ. He put the truck in gear. He wasn't going to the pharmacy. He was going to gather intel. It was 9:05 p.m. when Ryan parked his SUV 2 blocks away from Marcy's diner. The diner was closed, the neon open sign dark, but he could see a single fluorescent light glowing in the back office. Marcy was cashing out the registers. Ryan moved through the shadows of the alleyway with the absolute silence of a man who had stalked heavily armed insurgents through pitch-black ravines. He didn't walk up to the front door. He approached the back delivery entrance, tested the handle, unlocked, and slipped inside the kitchen. Marcy was sitting at her small desk, counting stacks of worn bills, rubbing her temples. She looked exhausted. 65s. "You need to fix the lock on that back door, Miss Marcy," a voice said from the doorway. Marcy jumped, knocking a stack of 10s onto the floor. A scream died in her throat as she looked up. When she saw the tall, broad-shouldered man leaning against the doorframe, her panic shifted into a deep, sinking dread. She recognized him instantly, even though he was 15 years older and heavily muscled compared to the high school track star she remembered. "Ryan," she breathed, face turning gray. "Oh, sweet Jesus, Ryan Whitmore." "Hello, Marcy." He stepped into the light. He was wearing dark jeans, boots, and a fitted black t-shirt that revealed the intricate military tattoos sleeving his right arm. 50s. "I saw my mother an hour ago." Marcy immediately burst into tears, covering her face with her hands. "Ryan, I am so sorry. I am so sorry. I wanted to help her. I did. But Mallory, he had his hand on his gun. He's a monster. He destroys anyone who steps out of line in this town." Ryan walked over and picked up the dropped money, setting it neatly on her desk. "I'm not here to yell at you, Marcy. I understand fear. I know what an armed man can do to unarmed civilians. But I need you to understand something. I am going to end Rexford Mallory's career, and I need to know exactly what I'm dealing with. 45s on I need intel." Marcy looked up, eyes wide. "Ryan, you're a soldier. I know that. But this isn't a war zone. This is Willowbrook. Mallory has 20 deputies. He has the state politicians in his pocket. If you just go beat him up, they'll throw you in federal prison for assaulting an officer." "I'm not going to just beat him up," Ryan said, voice chillingly flat. "I'm going to dismantle his life. I'm going to tear down his empire brick by brick, so that by the time I'm finished with him, he'll be begging me to let him go to prison. But I need to know his pressure points. What else is he doing besides terrorizing old women? Marcy hesitated, wringing her hands. 45s. Then she stood up and walked over to a filing cabinet, locking the office door first. Nobody talks about it because the people he targets don't have the money for lawyers, she whispered. But Mallory isn't just a racist bully. He's running a racket. Over the last 2 years, he's been using civil asset forfeiture laws to steal property. Ryan frowned. Explain. He targets the minority neighborhoods, Marcy said, pulling a folded county map from a drawer. He'll pull someone over for a broken taillight, claim he smells marijuana, and seize their car. He'll raid a house claiming anonymous tips about drug activity, find nothing, but seize their cash and put a lien on the property under suspicion of criminal enterprise. 50s. He auctions the houses off for pennies on the dollar. And guess who buys them? A shell company connected to him. Ryan's mind rapidly processed the tactical landscape. Let me guess. Exactly. Marcy nodded. A development group out of Atlanta. They want to bulldoze the east side of Willowbrook to build a luxury logistics hub for the new highway. Your mother's house, Ryan, your mother's house is right in the middle of the proposed map. The pieces clicked together in Ryan's mind with lethal precision. The slap in the diner wasn't just a spontaneous act of bigoted rage. It was a calculated act of terror. All 55s. Mallory was trying to intimidate Helen into leaving town so he could seize her property. He was breaking her spirit to steal her home. Does he have a weak link? Ryan asked. Someone on the inside who isn't entirely loyal? Marcy thought for a moment. Deputy Cole Brennan. He's 23. His dad was a good cop, died a few years ago. Cole joined up to honor him. But I see the way he looks when Mallory goes off. He's sick to his stomach. But he's trapped. He usually works the graveyard shift alone, patrolling the county line. Ryan nodded slowly. He had his entry point. He had his target's motive. 35s. And he had a potential human intelligence source. Thank you, Marcy. He turned toward the back door. Ryan, wait. Marcy's voice trembled. What are you going to do? He paused, looking back over his shoulder. The dim light caught the edge of the scar on his neck. I'm going to conduct an operation, he said softly. I'm going to make Sheriff Mallory realize that he is no longer the apex predator in this town. Tell no one I was here. Ryan slipped out into the alleyway, fading into the darkness as if he had never been there at all. By 2:10 a.m., Ryan had tracked Deputy Cole Brennan's patrol car to a lonely stretch of highway near the county border. 55s. The cruiser was parked behind an abandoned billboard, engine idling. Cole was likely trying to stay awake through a quiet night. Ryan parked his SUV half a mile away in a thick grove of trees. He dressed in his tactical gear, dark clothing, soft-soled boots, a black ball cap, and a chest rig he kept concealed under a light jacket. He didn't bring a firearm. He didn't need one to terrify a rookie cop. He brought zip ties, a flashlight, and his unyielding discipline. Moving through the dense Georgia brush, Ryan was a ghost. He utilized the stealth techniques he had perfected stalking sentries in the Korengal Valley. He approached the cruiser from the rear blind spot, placing each foot carefully to avoid snapping twigs. 75s. Cole was inside, sipping an energy drink, listening to a sports podcast. The windows were rolled up, the air conditioning blasting. Ryan reached the driver's side door. He waited for a passing semi-truck on the distant highway to mask the sound. As the rumble of the truck peaked, Ryan struck the driver's side window with the base of his palm. Hard enough to sound like a gunshot, but not hard enough to break the glass. Cole jumped out of his skin, dropping his energy drink all over his lap. He scrambled for his flashlight and his radio, peering into the pitch-black woods. He saw nothing. Trembling, he unlocked his door and stepped out, unholstering his service weapon. "Police! Show yourself!" he shouted, voice cracking. He swept his flashlight beam across the tree line, nothing but shadows and Spanish moss. "I said, show yourself!" He took 3 steps away from the safety of his vehicle. It was a fatal tactical error. From the roof of the cruiser, where he had silently vaulted seconds before, Ryan dropped down directly behind the deputy. Before Cole could even register the movement in his peripheral vision, Ryan clamped a hand over his mouth, hooked a leg behind Cole's knee, and brought the young officer crashing to the dirt. In a span of 2 seconds, Cole found himself pinned face down in the mud, his gun expertly stripped from his hand, and a knee pressing into his spine with the weight of a falling anvil. "Do not scream, 30s. Do not struggle," a voice whispered directly into Cole's ear. The voice was so calm, so devoid of adrenaline, that it terrified Cole more than if the man had been screaming. "If you try to alert dispatch, I will dislocate your shoulder. Nod if you understand." Cole, suffocating under the iron grip, nodded frantically. Ryan slowly removed his hand from Cole's mouth, but kept the pressure on his spine. "My name is Ryan Whitmore. Helen Whitmore is my mother." Cole went entirely rigid. He had heard the rumors at the station about what Mallory had done at the diner. He also knew, unlike Mallory, who Helen's son was. He had seen the framed military photos in Helen's hallway when he responded to a noise complaint years ago. Oh God," Cole gasped into the dirt. "Man, please, I wasn't there. I swear to God, I wasn't there." "I know you weren't," Ryan said softly. "If you were and you did nothing, we would be having a very different conversation. I am here because I need a tour guide, Cole. Sheriff Mallory has built a very dirty house, and you are going to give me the blueprints." "He'll kill me," Cole sobbed. "If I rat on him, he'll kill me." Ryan leaned in closer, the icy calm never wavering. "Deputy, you need to recalibrate your threat assessment. Rexford Mallory is a local bully with a badge, 45s. I am a Tier 1 operator who has dismantled terrorist cells for the United States government. If you don't help me, I won't kill you. But I will make sure you go to federal prison for complicity in his racketeering. Now you are going to tell me exactly where Mallory keeps the physical ledgers for his asset forfeiture properties. And then we are going to go for a drive." Cole's hand shook so violently he could barely keep his patrol cruiser on the road. Sitting in the passenger seat, Ryan was a statue carved from midnight, his eyes scanning the passing pine trees with mechanical precision. "The lodge," Cole stammered, voice dry. "It's about 10 miles out off Route 9. Mallory bought it 3 years ago. Supposedly, it's just a hunting cabin. But he's got a 10-foot high tensile fence around it and commercial-grade security cameras. He keeps 2 deputies posted there off the books every night. Vargas and Mercer. They're his heavy hitters." "Lethal force authorized?" Ryan asked, tone strictly professional. They carry AR-15s and they've got orders to shoot trespassers on sight. Cole gulped. Mallory claims it's to protect county evidence he stores there, but everyone knows it's his private vault. The ledgers, the offshore bank routing numbers, the property deeds. If it's not at the courthouse, it's in the floor safe in his master study. Good, Ryan said. Pull over a mile before the gate. Keep your headlights off. Jules, you're going to wait in the car. If I am not back in 45 minutes, drive back to the station and pretend tonight never happened. What are you going to do? Cole asked, bringing the cruiser to a halt on the dirt shoulder. I'm going to acquire the target package, Ryan replied, slipping out of the door before Cole could even blink. The door clicked shut, and when Cole looked into the rearview mirror, the road was completely empty. It was as if the earth had swallowed the man whole. A mile down the road, the hunting lodge sat bathed in the harsh, artificial glare of halogen lights. It was a massive log and stone structure, completely out of place in the impoverished county. E445s. Two men in tactical vests over their deputy uniforms sat on the expansive front porch, smoking cigars and playing cards on a folding table. Their rifles leaned against the railing. From the tree line, Ryan observed them through a pair of compact thermal binoculars. He noted their casual posture, the loose slings on their rifles, and their complete lack of situational awareness. They were bullies used to intimidating unarmed civilians, not sentries expecting an assault from a Tier 1 operator. Ryan bypassed the gate entirely. He scaled a large oak tree whose branches extended over the high tensile fence, moving with a fluid, silent grace that defied his size. He dropped onto the soft moss inside the perimeter, rolling to absorb the impact. He didn't want a firefight. 45s. Gunfire would draw the state police, and Ryan needed a clean, airtight case for the FBI, not a local shootout that Mallory could spin as a drug raid gone wrong. He flanked the house, moving through the shadows until he reached the breaker box on the side of the garage. With a multi-tool, he popped the lock and studied the panel. He didn't cut the main power. That would trigger the backup generators and put the guards on high alert. Instead, he isolated the circuit for the exterior porch lights and the front-facing cameras. He flipped the switch. On the porch, the halogens died instantly, plunging Vargas and Mercer into darkness. "What the hell?" Vargas muttered, the scrape of his chair echoing loudly in the quiet night. "Breaker tripped again?" "Probably." Mercer sighed, picking up his flashlight. "I'll go check the box. Watch the perimeter." Bailey 65s. Mercer walked down the wooden steps, heavy boots thudding loudly. He swept his beam across the lawn, completely missing the shadow pressed flat against the stone foundation. As Mercer rounded the corner toward the garage and reached for the breaker box, a hand clamped over his mouth and nose, instantly cutting off his air supply. A forearm wrapped around his neck, applying precisely calibrated pressure to his carotid arteries. Mercer flailed, dropping his flashlight, hands clawing uselessly at the steel band of muscle choking him. In 6 seconds, his eyes rolled back and he went limp. Ryan lowered the unconscious deputy to the grass, securing his wrists and ankles with heavy-duty zip ties and placing a piece of duct tape over his mouth. One down. 85s! Back on the porch, Vargas was growing impatient. "Mercer, you tripping in the dark, you idiot!" He stepped off the porch, clicking off the safety of his rifle, a sudden prickle of unease raising the hairs on the back of his neck. He moved toward the corner of the house. He never saw Ryan drop from the porch roof above him. Ryan landed behind Vargas, immediately stripping the rifle from the deputy's grasp with his left hand, while his right hand drove a palm strike into the brachial plexus nerve cluster on the side of Vargas's neck. Vargas collapsed like a puppet with its strings cut, entirely paralyzed but terrifyingly conscious. Ryan zip-tied him next to Mercer, leaning close to Vargas's ear. "Blink if you understand that if you make a sound, I will put you in a coma." "Andes." Vargas, eyes wide with absolute primal terror, blinked furiously. Perimeter secure, Ryan picked the heavy deadbolt on the back door and entered the lodge. The interior smelled of expensive leather, stale bourbon, and cigar smoke. He moved methodically, clearing rooms until he reached the master study. Cole's intel was accurate. Under a heavy Persian rug, Ryan found the circular steel lid of a floor safe. He pulled a small, specialized electronic device from his tactical pouch, an auto dialer used by federal agencies to bypass older combination locks. He attached the magnetic base to the dial, turned it on, and let it work. 3 minutes later, the safe clicked, and the heavy bolt retracted. Ryan pulled the door open. 45s. Inside were stacks of $100 bills bound in rubber bands, but he ignored the cash. He reached for the back of the safe and pulled out 2 thick, leather-bound ledgers and a portable hard drive. He opened the first ledger and shone his red lens pen light on the pages. The scope of the operation was staggering. Mallory wasn't just stealing houses. He was laundering money for a massive synthetic opioid ring operating out of Atlanta. The developers buying the seized properties were front men for a cartel. Mallory was seizing the land, forcing out the black and low-income residents, and selling the properties to the cartel to build distribution warehouses masquerading as commercial logistics hubs. And right there, circled in red ink on a county parcel map stapled to the back page, was Helen Whitmore's address. Ryan photographed every single page with his secure satellite phone, uploading the files directly to a heavily encrypted cloud server he shared with a contact in the Department of Justice. Then he put the physical ledgers and the hard drive into his backpack. He had the proof. But proving it in a courtroom would take months, and Mallory would likely flee or destroy evidence before the FBI could move in. Ryan needed Mallory to panic. He needed the sheriff to make a catastrophic public mistake. It was time to take the war to Rexford Mallory. Sheriff Rexford Mallory woke at 6:05 a.m. to the sound of his coffee maker beeping in his sprawling, heavily gated suburban home. 55 fivs. He rolled out of his king-sized bed, feeling a dull ache in his knuckles from where he had struck the old woman the day before. He smiled grimly. It was a good ache, a reminder of his absolute control. He walked into his massive kitchen, tying his silk robe around his waist, and headed for the coffee pot. He stopped dead in his tracks. The blood drained from Mallory's face, leaving his flushed, ruddy complexion a sickly shade of gray. Sitting perfectly centered on his pristine granite kitchen island was his prized possession, his grandfather's silver-plated Colt .45 revolver. Only it wasn't a revolver anymore. It had been entirely field-stripped. 55s. The cylinder, the barrel, the springs, and the grips were laid out in a flawless, chillingly neat row. See? And placed gently beneath the dismantled firing pin was a cheap white paper napkin. Mallory approached it with trembling hands. On the center of the napkin was a single dried brown stain, a drop of spilled coffee. Mallory's breath caught in his throat. His home security system was state-of-the-art. His perimeter alarm was on. His gates were locked. His Doberman Pinscher was sleeping soundly on the living room rug, unharmed but completely oblivious. Someone had bypassed it all. Someone had stood in his kitchen while he slept, dismantled his weapon in total silence, and left a message tying it directly to the incident at Marcy's diner. No, Mallory whispered, a cold sweat breaking out across his forehead. No, no, no. He scrambled for his cell phone on the counter and dialed the hunting lodge. The phone rang 6 times and went to voicemail. He dialed Vargas's cell. Voicemail. He dialed Mercer's cell. Voicemail. Panic, a raw and unfamiliar emotion, clawed at Mallory's chest. He ran to his bedroom, threw on his uniform, grabbed his backup Glock from his nightstand, and sprinted to his squad car. He broke every speed limit getting to the lodge. When he pulled through the front gates, he slammed on the brakes, the cruiser skidding through the gravel. 80s. Vargas and Mercer were still tied to the front porch pillars. They were awake, dehydrated, and looking like men who had seen the devil himself. Mallory jumped out of the car, sprinting up the steps and pulling out his pocket knife to cut their zip ties. What happened? Who hit you? Was it the feds? Was it the Atlanta guys? Vargas slumped forward, rubbing his raw wrists, voice a hoarse croak. We didn't see anything, boss. 1 second the lights went out. The next it was just a shadow. He took us apart like we were children. He didn't even use a gun. Mallory didn't wait to hear the rest. 45 vibes. He shoved past them and ran into the lodge, leaving a trail of muddy boot prints. He reached the master study and fell to his knees, staring at the floor safe. The door was wide open. The cache was completely untouched. But the ledgers and the hard drive were gone. God damn it, Mallory roared, slamming his fist into the floorboards. The echo filled the empty house. He was ruined. If those ledgers went to the FBI, he wouldn't just go to federal prison. The Atlanta cartel would butcher him for exposing their logistics network. He had a very narrow window to fix this, but his mind was spinning. Who had the skills to do this? His mind raced back to the napkin, the diner, the old woman, Helen Whitmore. Could she have complained to the state police? No. The state boys didn't operate like ghosts. This was military. This was specialized. Then a sick realization washed over him. He remembered the framed photographs Cole Brennan had mentioned years ago during a noise complaint. Helen's son, the one who joined the Navy. Mallory pulled out his phone and called his dispatcher. Brenda, run a background check. Deep level. Military records. Name is Ryan Whitmore. Mother is Helen Whitmore on Birch Street. Send it to my secure terminal right now. 10 minutes later, Mallory sat at his desk in the precinct, staring at his computer monitor. The file Brenda had pulled was heavily redacted. Entire pages were blacked out by the Department of Defense. But what wasn't redacted was enough to stop Mallory's heart. Naval Special Warfare Development Group, Silver Star, multiple combat deployments, expert in asymmetrical warfare, psychological operations, and close quarters combat. Mallory wasn't dealing with a pissed-off local. He was being hunted by an apex predator. Sheriff, Deputy Cole Brennan poked his head into the office carrying a stack of paperwork. Cole's face was carefully blank, though his heart was hammering against his ribs. Everything all right? You look pale. Shut the door, Cole, Mallory said softly. Cole closed the door and stood at attention. We have a situation, Mallory said, pacing the room like a caged animal. 50s. We have a rogue military asset in Willowbrook. He broke into the lodge last night and stole county evidence. He's trying to build a case against this department. What do we do? Cole asked, playing his part perfectly. Mallory stopped pacing. His eyes hardened, the panic morphing into cornered desperation. A cornered animal is the most dangerous kind, and Mallory was ready to burn the whole town down to save himself. He took the ledgers to protect his mother's house, Mallory muttered to himself, connecting the dots. He wants to stop the development. If he has the files, he's probably waiting to hand them off to a federal contact. We can't let that happen. He looked at Cole. 45s. Gather the tactical team. I want helmets, body armor, and long guns. We are executing a no-knock raid on Helen Whitmore's residence at 1400 hours. Anonymous tip of a hostage situation and heavily armed drug activity. Cole's blood ran cold. Sheriff, it's broad daylight. She's a 72-year-old woman. The town will riot. I don't care about the town, Mallory bellowed, spit flying from his lips. This guy wants to play war? I'll show him what a war looks like. We hit the house, we tear it apart, we find the hard drive, and if Ryan Whitmore resists, he gets put down as a hostile combatant. Do I make myself perfectly clear? Yes, sir, Cole said, turning to leave. As soon as he stepped into the hallway, he pulled his cell phone from his pocket and typed a single prearranged text message to a burner number. Green light. They are coming to the house. Across town, sitting in the darkened living room of his mother's home, Ryan Whitmore watched his phone screen light up with Cole's message. Helen was safe. Ryan had moved her to a trusted friend's house in the next county before dawn, packing her a bag and telling her not to turn on the news. Now Ryan was completely alone in the house he grew up in. He walked over to the windows, pulling the heavy floral curtains shut. He rolled up the carpets, pushed the heavy oak furniture to form natural funnels and barricades, and systematically unscrewed every light bulb in the house except for one in the central hallway. He wasn't preparing a defense. He was building a web. Ryan checked the action on his Sig Sauer P226, though he had no intention of firing a lethal shot unless his life was in immediate, unavoidable danger. He checked his flex cuffs. He checked his flashbangs. Sheriff Mallory thought he was sending a tactical team to conduct a raid. He didn't realize he was sending his men into a fatal funnel orchestrated by a man who had survived the most brutal sieges of the modern era. Ryan sat in the shadows of the kitchen, perfectly still, slowing his breathing. He listened to the distant hum of the highway, waiting for the wail of the sirens. The storm was about to break over Willowbrook, and Ryan was the lightning. At precisely 2:10 p.m., the quiet, sun-baked stretch of Birch Street was shattered by the roar of heavy V8 engines. 4 county sheriff's SUVs, tires screeching against the asphalt, formed a jagged barricade across Helen Whitmore's front lawn. 10 deputies piled out, clad in heavy olive-drab tactical vests, Kevlar helmets, and carrying AR-15 rifles. At the center of the formation was Sheriff Rexford Mallory, face a mask of sweating, desperate rage. He pumped a 12-gauge shotgun, the metallic clack-clack echoing off the neighboring houses. Curtains in the adjacent homes fluttered as terrified neighbors peered out. They saw the armored men swarm the retired English teacher's house, and a collective helpless dread washed over the block. "Stack up!" Mallory roared, pointing the barrel of his shotgun at the front door. 55s. Breach and clear. If he breathes wrong, put him down. Vargas, his neck still wrapped in a brace from the night before, hoisted a heavy steel battering ram. He swung it with all his remaining strength against the brass lock of Helen's front door. The wood splintered with a deafening crack, and the door kicked open, swinging wildly on broken hinges. "Sheriff's Department! Get on the ground!" Vargas screamed, flooding into the hallway. Mercer and 3 other deputies filed in rapidly behind him, sweeping their rifle muzzles through the entryway. They expected the chaotic, panicked resistance of a cornered criminal. Instead, they stepped into a meticulously designed nightmare, Zuro's. The house was suffocatingly dark, the heavy curtains blocking the afternoon sun entirely. The only illumination came from a single bare bulb hanging at the far end of the central hallway, creating a harsh, blinding glare that completely ruined their night-adjusted vision. And then the single bulb popped. Total darkness swallowed them. Before Vargas could reach for the flashlight mounted on his rifle, a cylindrical canister bounced off the doorframe and rolled directly between his boots. Bang! The stun grenade detonated with a blinding flash of magnesium light and a concussive shockwave of 170 decibels. The deputies in the hallway screamed, their inner ears violently disrupted, their vision reduced to blinding white spots. Ryan moved from the shadows of the kitchen like a hunting panther. He wore tactical noise-canceling headsets and dark-lensed ballistic glasses. To him, the chaos was a slow-motion ballet he had rehearsed 1,000 times. He didn't fire a single shot. He used the structure of the hallway against them. He grabbed the barrel of Mercer's rifle, violently jerking the deputy forward off his balance, and delivered a devastating knee to the man's solar plexus. Mercer folded in half, gasping for air that wouldn't come, before Ryan swept his legs, sending him crashing into Vargas in the narrow corridor. 2 other deputies, panicking in the smoke and ringing silence, squeezed their triggers, blowing holes in the ceiling plaster. Ryan flowed past the gunfire. 45s. He grabbed the 3rd deputy by the tactical vest, using the man's own forward momentum to hurl him into the heavy oak barricade Ryan had built from the dining table. The deputy hit the wood and slumped unconscious. Within 30 seconds, the 5-man entry team was neutralized, disarmed, incapacitated, and groaning on the floorboards. Ryan expertly kicked their weapons out of reach. Outside on the porch, Mallory heard the flashbang, the muffled shouts, and then a terrifying silence. "Vargas! Mercer! Report!" Mallory screamed into his radio. Static hissed back at him. Sweat poured down Mallory's face. He signaled the remaining 4 men. "We push in! Now! 80s! Fas B." They stepped over the shattered doorframe. The smoke from the flashbang hung thick in the air. Mallory clicked his flashlight on, the beam cutting through the gray haze, illuminating the groaning bodies of his elite entry team scattered like broken toys. "Split up," Mallory whispered, voice trembling. "Clear the rooms." The deputies crept into the living room and the kitchen. Mallory moved slowly down the main hallway, shotgun raised, finger white on the trigger. The silence of the house was absolute, heavy, and judgmental. "Whitmore," Mallory yelled, voice cracking with fear. "It's over. I've got a perimeter. You're a dead man. 85s. "You're standing exactly where you slapped my mother," a voice said. It didn't come from in front of him. It came from directly above him. Before Mallory could tilt his shotgun upward, 220 pounds of hardened muscle dropped from the attic access panel in the ceiling. Ryan landed squarely on Mallory's shoulders. The sheer kinetic force drove the massive sheriff face first into the hardwood floor. The shotgun flew from Mallory's hands, clattering uselessly down the hall. Mallory gasped, trying to push himself up, but a knee pressed into his spine with the weight of a freight train. A cold steel barrel pressed gently against the back of his neck. "Don't move," Ryan whispered. It wasn't an order. 45s. It was a physical law of the universe. In the living room, the remaining deputies spun around at the noise. But before they could even aim their weapons, the front windows exploded inward. Not from Ryan, from the outside. "FBI, drop your weapons. Drop the weapons now." Red laser sights cut through the smoke, painting the chests of the remaining county deputies. A dozen federal agents in heavy tactical gear, armed with submachine guns, flooded through the broken windows and the front door. Behind them, unmarked black vans had completely surrounded Mallory's cruisers. Ryan's contact at the Department of Justice hadn't just received the ledgers. He had acted on them with federal jurisdiction. Deputy Cole Brennan, standing by the cruisers on the lawn, immediately dropped his rifle and put his hands on his head, a relieved, tearful smile breaking across his face. Inside, the federal agents swarmed the house, securing the remaining deputies. An older, gray-haired FBI special agent in charge walked down the hallway, stepping carefully over the debris. He looked down at Ryan, who still had his knee on Mallory's back. "Senior Chief Whitmore?" the FBI agent asked calmly. "Agent Reed," Ryan replied, keeping his eyes on the back of Mallory's head. "I believe this belongs to you." Ryan stood up, stepping back, allowing two federal agents to haul Sheriff Rexford Mallory to his feet. Mallory was bleeding from the nose, his uniform torn, his face pale with absolute defeat. You're making a mistake," Mallory spat at the FBI agent. "I'm the law in this county. I have friends in the state capitol. I'll have your badge for this." Special Agent Donovan Reed pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. "Rexford Mallory, you are under arrest for federal racketeering, wire fraud, civil rights violations, and conspiracy to distribute narcotics. While you were busy playing soldier here, the DEA just raided the Atlanta logistics hub, and your developer friends flipped on you in about 10 seconds. Mallory's eyes went wide, the final shred of his arrogance evaporating. He looked at Ryan. The Navy SEAL stood in the shadows, his face an impenetrable mask of calm. 80s. "You planned this," Mallory whispered, voice hollow. "You set me up to leave the precinct so they could move in." "I told you," Ryan said softly. "I was going to dismantle your life." The arrest of Sheriff Rexford Mallory sent shockwaves through the state. But in Willowbrook, it brought an exhalation of breath the town had been holding for decades. Within 48 hours, the corrupt deputies were suspended pending federal indictment. The seized properties, including the titles to the East Side homes, were frozen by the DOJ, set to be returned to their rightful owners. The cartel's pipeline through the county was permanently severed. 3 days later, Marcy's diner was packed. The 50s. The morning sun was shining, the coffee was brewing, and the low, easy murmur of the town was alive with genuine, unburdened laughter. The bell above the door chimed. The diner went quiet, but this time it wasn't out of fear. Helen Whitmore walked in. The bruising on her face had faded to a dull yellow, but she stood tall, wearing a bright floral dress, her silver hair perfectly pinned. Beside her walked Ryan, dressed in a simple gray t-shirt and jeans, carrying his mother's purse. The entire diner stood up. It started with a slow clap from the back booth, and within seconds the room erupted into a standing ovation. People cheered, wiping tears from their eyes. 45s. Men who had looked away in shame days earlier now stepped forward to shake Ryan's hand and pull Helen into tight, apologetic embraces. Marcy came out from behind the counter, sobbing openly, and wrapped her arms around Helen. "Welcome back, honey. Your booth is waiting." Helen smiled, eyes shining with unshed tears. She squeezed Marcy's hand and walked to her usual table. Ryan slid into the booth across from her. "You see, Mom," Ryan said, reaching across the Formica table to hold her weathered hand. "There's still good in this town. You just had to clear out the rot so the light could get in." Helen looked out the window. 45 Fevs. Across the street, Deputy Cole Brennan, now acting interim sheriff, endorsed by the state police to clean up the department, was helping an elderly man cross the intersection. She looked back at her son, the warrior who had brought the full might of his devotion to her doorstep. "I see it, Ryan." She smiled softly. "I finally see it.